I've been reading a lot of opinions from a lot of different people regarding Death Stranding now that I've finished the game. It's easy to see that it's a polarizing experience. A glorified walking simulator to some, and surprisingly enjoyable to others, although both camps seem to recognize the oceans of polish that's put into crafting it. Personally, I'd call the whole journey a net positive. I've reached the end of the story, and I've gone on to maximize my rank with several optional deliveries. I've played around with the majority of the gadgets and features available, and even read most of the optional email messages and the lore-heavy interview files. So it's safe to say I've gotten invested in Death Stranding's unusual world, and even more unusual gameplay loop. But I want to talk about something that goes a little beyond just whether the game is good or not. Now, I didn't want to mention him too much in this video since in many reviews I've read, Mr. Kojima seems to get more focused in the product that they were supposed to be evaluating. But I do need to bring up something he's been on record saying about Death Stranding that I think is important. He says that it's a Strand type game, as in, he's created an entire new genre. Most people have glanced over this with a bit of a laugh and a roll of the eyes. It's Kojima being his typically indulgent self. But it did get me thinking. Death Stranding is actually more interesting from a gameplay perspective than what it initially appears. I have to preface this point by pointing something else out. The way we classify video game genres is kind of ridiculous. When it comes to films, you can quite easily categorize something into action, comedy, horror, etc. But when we come to do the same thing to a game, we make a fatal error. We have first-person shooters, RPGs, horror, survival horror, platformer, action, adventure, and many more. But some of these, such as action and horror, are identified by the feeling we get from playing them, the tone they follow or the story conventions they borrow from, while others, such as first-person shooters, RPGs and platformers, are identified by the mechanics the player will use within the game. This causes a lot of confusion when you start getting games that mix several mechanics and story elements. And video games are becoming so homogenized, especially in the larger, higher budget titles, that things like what an RPG actually is becomes very difficult to define. After all, you could say that an RPG is something with traditional numeric character progression, such as stats and levels, where you assume the role of a particular character or group of characters. But then if you go by that definition, we have to call Assassin's Creed a role-playing game, but I don't think we would call it that. It just doesn't seem to fit. So we have all these vaguely definable genres that are all borrowing ideas from one another, until we don't actually have a good classification system for any of them, unless we were to either start concentrating exclusively on listing mechanics or on the tone of the game, much like a film. Now, this isn't to say we need to categorize them in the first place, but as human beings, it's something that we do like to do in order to quickly let others know exactly what to expect. The idea of announcing you have made an entirely new genre is therefore kind of baffling. Firstly, you can't really say I have created a new genre, in my opinion, because your work will be categorized by those who play it. Saying that feels more like what it probably is, either some light narcissism or a buzz statement intended to get people interested. But it's also difficult to grasp how you can completely create a new genre when we already have a web of loosely interconnected genres that everyone is borrowing ideas from. For example, I could tell you that Death Stranding is an open-world, third-person action game with RPG and horror elements, and I'd be correct in saying that. But what I think the statement was supposed to get across, if given the benefit of the doubt, is that there really aren't any games with the same focus that Death Stranding has. It's a game where the primary objective really actually is to deliver people's packages from one point to another. There's a deep narrative woven in there, and well, a lot of silly names and terminology to go along with that. But the focus is to actually make getting from one point to another satisfying and interesting. You're rewarded for preparation and for balancing your cargo weight against that level of preparation. Sure, you can bring 10 ladders and ropes with you on your delivery, in case you need to traverse a rocky outcrop, but you'll be putting yourself in danger of falling or dropping your cargo and causing it damage. You have to think about whether you want to go through a bandit camp or go around it, potentially taking more time and running into rougher terrain. And even if you did opt for the camp, do you sneak your way through and avoid confrontation? Or do you bring weaponry and self-defense gear and stroll right through the middle? Everything is about careful planning and even more careful execution, even down to the most minute of cases. You have to make sure you watch how even your footing is while you're walking in the wild. A difficult to see rock jutting out of the ground could trip you, send you sprawling into a river, and then you have to scramble after your delivery as it floats downstream. Now, to some, this sounds incredibly dull, and I'm not going to pretend Death Stranding is for everyone. But it is actually something I can say is fairly unique. Claiming you've invented the genre might be going a bit far, but it hits the correct notes because Death Stranding is trying to make traversal the real opposition. Rocky crags are your enemies, and huge mountains and lakes are your boss fights. That's not to say it doesn't have a lot of traditional video game regulars. There are actually boss fights, for example. But some of the dialogue from one of the characters almost makes me feel like they're in there as a concession, and even a tongue-in-cheek statement about the expectations of many players. "Aren't you tired of the grind?" one character asks our avatar, Sam Bridges, before exclaiming, "It's time for a good old-fashioned boss fight." There's also an upgrade system and a number of combat options, but most of the time you'll be delivering packages, setting up zipwire networks, building roads, and creating helpful facilities such as battery chargers and safe houses for yourself and other online players. We do use the terms Metroidvania and Souls-like and roguelike to define genres of games too, as a reference to the games that created something quite unique. So despite what I've said on the contrary, it isn't completely absurd to say that Death Stranding could spur on a new genre in a similar way. But I do find it unlikely. The story is an assortment of shower thoughts and strange imagery organized together and given to very talented actors to bring to life. Plus, things like the time fall and the mechanics linked to death are very specific to this case, making it difficult to recreate elsewhere. There's so much polish in the visuals and technology required to make something of this caliber work that you can practically see the money spent making it dripping off the screen. The gameplay is, as mentioned, polarizing and specific, and once again needs a lot of money to make something similar to be convincing and interesting. So it's not something I can see at the moment catching on in the mainstream as a brand new genre. But none of this is a bad thing. The game came about as a vanity project given as much money and time as it needed, and it really shows. The reason the indie game scene became so popular is because of a mix between nostalgia, affordability, and unique ideas. And Death Stranding has the latter of those in spades, making it essentially a very expensive indie title made by an esteemed madman. We need more people and games trying to break norms. For all of this game's faults, and for the personal faults of its creator, this was the aim of Death Stranding, to make something new where there's nothing new under the sun. This is why I'm glad Death Stranding has done relatively well despite some bad reviews. No matter the media, be it film, TV, book or game, I feel it's good to reward that which is outside the box creatively, even if it has some fault. Creatively, it's easy to make another tried and true military shooter or pixel art Metroidvania, but it's not often we get something so outlandish and unusual in both story and gameplay as Death Stranding. Thank you for watching my thoughts on Death Stranding, and if you enjoyed this, be sure to check out some other stuff. I'll be back soon. My name's Nate.